Again, I'm Lauren Knight Pearson. I'm a clinical social worker. I work for UMass Memorial, but I work at one of their offsite locations in Barre, Massachusetts. I hope you all know where Barre is. It's out further from here. It's out there. So I'm happy to be back to do this talk again. This is something that is super, super important. Really kind of came out of, it's always been important. So your mental health and staying connected is always important, but what we found with the pandemic and everything closing down, people became very isolated and became lonely. And as we go through this, we're gonna learn that social isolation and loneliness are two different things. And one of the other things we're gonna talk about after we talk about social isolation and loneliness is grief, and grief as we age, because grief is a big part of life for all of us, but it gets more complicated as we age as well. All right. So, like I said, I'm a clinical social worker at the Barre Family Health Center. I provide integrated behavioral health to our patients that receive their primary care in our health center, and I'm also an instructor at UMass Chan Medical. I have nothing to disclose, no disclosures to report. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, I'll be able to identify the difference between social isolation and loneliness, describe at least one activity and ways to stay connected to family or friends in the community, and understand grief and how to grieve in a healthy way. So let's start with loneliness. So what is it? What is loneliness? So it's actually a feeling. It's a state of distress, discomfort, when we feel that there's a gap between a desire for social connection and the actual experience of social connection. So what we know is you can be surrounded by people, hundreds of people. You can be surrounded by a community, but you can still feel lonely and not connected to that community. And when we're lonely, we often feel the emotional pain. And when we feel pain emotionally, we often don't want to interact or trust one another, because what happens is when we're feeling emotional pain, we feel vulnerable. And when we feel vulnerable, we know that we can be hurt by others. Others aren't purposefully trying to hurt us, but that's kind of the process that goes on in our head. So if we're lonely, and we're feeling emotional pain, and we isolate, we're going to increase our social isolation, but also increase our feelings of loneliness and not want to interact with others for the perceived feeling of being threatened. And so social isolation is lacking social contacts. So it's not being connected to your community, to your family, to your friends, whatever your group is. So it could be you live alone, you don't have any neighbors that live nearby, you have no transportation, you're socially isolated. That in turn can lead to loneliness, but just because you're socially isolated doesn't mean you're lonely. So you could be socially isolated, as many of us were in COVID, but we weren't lonely because there were different ways that we were able to stay connected to people. So loneliness is the feeling. Social isolation is more of the act of not having those contacts. And again, friends, family, community, pets, whatever that person or animal or thing is, that is going to give you that connection. So what can really increase our risk for loneliness and social isolation? If you live alone or you're unable to leave your house, right? So if you live alone and you can't leave your house, you're more likely to be socially isolated unless you have other ways to connect with people. Major life changes. So something changes in your life. You get sick, you lose a partner, you lose a spouse, you lose a friend, any type of loss, retirement, think about, right? Everyone, we all, like, as I hear so often from individuals I work with, they work, and then they retire. And those first couple months, they're like, this is great. And then about 3 to 6 months in, they're like, this isn't so great. I miss having that purpose. I miss going to work. I miss interacting with the people that I worked with. So retirement, that's a huge life change. Financial stress, right? If you retire, your income changes. As we age, our income changes. Sadly, inflation and cost of living does not. So that can create more social isolation and loneliness, because if financially we can't afford to do things or go places, and they don't have to be places that are expensive or costly, that can increase your social isolation, which in turn can give you the feeling of loneliness. If you're acting as a caregiver for someone, so you're caring for someone, whether it be a family member, a partner, spouse, and you're providing care for that person, you're at high risk for social isolation because you're not able to interact with others because you are caring for another person. So it's hugely important, and we found this during COVID. A lot of the support groups for caregivers or support groups for different types of illnesses all went to virtual platforms. So that was really good that people could still connect, even though it wasn't in person. There was that sense of community. Cognitive changes, so memory loss, depression, anxiety, anything that's going to prevent you from motivating and wanting to go out and do something. Cognitive changes, often people will isolate because they don't want people to recognize, like, ooh, my memory is not where it used to be. Not feeling happy, feeling depressed, right? It's hard when someone is depressed. We often see that they're not motivated. They want to go do something, but motivation-wise, they just can't get to do it. Even though they know if they get to go wherever they want to go or try to do what they want to do, they will enjoy themselves. They just can't, that motivation is just not there to get to go. Hearing difficulties. If you can't hear, you can feel very isolated, right? You can be in a whole room of people and hear and pick up very little. And the other thing with hearing is, if we have a difficult time hearing, we also tend to have challenges with our memory, because if we're not hearing, we're not understanding, we're trying to piece together what people are saying to us, we're not likely going to remember because we're taxing our brain as well. There's a language barrier, right? If you're living in a community and you speak English and all your community members are primarily English speaking, less risk for social isolation. If you're living in a community and you're a non-English speaker, or English is not your first language, but the community's first language and their main language is English, it's harder to interact because you may not be able to understand fully what they're saying, and vice versa. If you are an English speaker and you're living in a community that is primarily non-English speaking, you're going to feel more socially isolated. So living in rural neighborhoods, I'll speak to that. I live in a rural area. My closest neighbor is probably a mile or two away, which is lovely. It's lovely. But it's 30 minutes to get anywhere. Not an active town, very small town. So if you live in a rural area, you're more likely to be socially isolated because there's fewer activities and events versus you live more in a city or a suburban area. If you live in hard to reach places, right? Like most areas are reachable, but there are some that are more difficult to access. Or if you live in a neighborhood where you feel unsafe and you don't go out as much because you feel it's unsafe, higher risk for social isolation, Individuals who experience discrimination, whether it be their age, their race, sexual orientation, gender identity, whatever the individual perceives as discrimination, they're more likely to be socially isolated if they're not feeling accepted by their community. So with social isolation, there are a lot of health risks that happen. And we have data that shows if you're lonely or socially isolated, you're going to have increased trips to the emergency department for multiple reasons. One, there's no one to necessarily talk to say, hey, I'm feeling a certain way, and kind of talk through what's going on. So instead of being able to talk to someone, you may go to the emergency department. It's going to provide two things. One, you're going to get the medical care if there's something wrong. And two, you're going to have social interaction. It may not be the social interaction you want, but you will certainly have some social interaction. Social isolation and loneliness also can lead to hypertension and high blood pressure, heart disease, decreased immune function, obviously depression and anxiety, cognitive decline, and poor sleep. So people always ask, like, why does it lead to some of these medical issues and health risks? Think about hypertension, high blood pressure. If you're socially isolated, you live in an area where there's not easy access, you may not be able to access the healthiest foods. You may be eating more processed foods, and that in turn is going to cause hypertension and can lead to heart disease. If you're not out and about and doing healthy things and moving your body, you're going to have a decreased immune function as well. Again, the depression and anxiety, you're not interacting with people, you're going to feel lonely and isolated. And believe it or not, social isolation and loneliness can actually cause pain. So there's emotional pain that is actually going to manifest, and it manifests the same stress response as physical pain. So when this is prolonged and goes for long periods of time, we're actually going to see an increase in inflammation in our bodies. The increased inflammation is also going to decrease our immunity for fighting off disease. So you can see how it all it's one big ball that kind of travels together. And we really have to work to think about what are the ways that we're going to be able to have interaction, decrease loneliness in a way that's comfortable for us and that's doable for us. So some of the basic ways that we can stay connected is really foundation. I will say to the individuals I work with, in order to improve, we have to have a solid foundation, like a house, right? If you build your house and your foundation isn't solid, your house is probably going to fall down or there's going to be issues. And so for us as humans, our foundation lies on good sleep, proper nutrition, and proper hydration, which sounds simple, right? Sounds really simple. Eat well, drink a lot of water, and sleep well. Those are really hard things to do. And unfortunately, as we age, our sleep patterns change as well, and as do our desire for different foods and for hydration. So really, really important to kind of have a good foundation and start there. Because if you have the solid foundation, as you improve and move up on that, you'll find that, excuse me, things will start to happen easier. So you want to think about engaging and re-engaging in activities you enjoy. And that can be a variety of different things. That can be getting out to the senior center. If you live in a community that has community activities, trying to go to some of the activities you enjoy. That can be as simple as if you like to paint or do crafts or draw or color, just doing a few of those activities, maybe not every day, but every couple days, just to kind of re-engage and slowly start taking part in things that you really enjoy. Get the brain working again. If you're able, take a class. A lot of the local colleges do offer classes that are at no charge. You can do them in person now. At COVID, it was mostly online, but even if you can engage online, it's not the human connection, but you still have some type of connection. You want to schedule time to be with friends and family. This is hard, right? It's hard because everyone's busy, but you want to be purposeful and schedule time, whether that be you call up a friend Whether that be if you have children, you call your children and say, hey, I want to have a phone call once a week at this, let's schedule a time that's convenient to both of us. That way you know when it's coming, they know when it's coming, and you can ensure that the time is set aside and you're not feeling like, oh, I want to call Sue today, and I call Sue and Sue's like, I really want to talk but I'm busy, or Sue doesn't answer your phone. So actually being deliberate about scheduling that. Activities, local libraries, local senior centers, community centers. Really good way to at least interact. Even if you don't interact with the people around you, just being and interacting in that space and observing what's going on in that space. Again, you can take an online class. Staying physically active, right, in your community. That can be as simple, I'll say to a lot of our patients, I want you to get out of the house and walk down the street or walk down the driveway or walk to your mailbox or walk, it doesn't matter the amount of time that you're out staying active, it's the act of doing. So if all of a sudden you're like, hey, I want to become more active, you're going to start small. That's why I say, take a walk down the driveway. Take a walk around the house. It's the act of doing, just being physically active and going at it slowly. I don't expect, that someone's going to get up and just all of a sudden walk a mile one day. You just want to come at it slowly, but just the art of doing and being active is super important. Any sort of spiritual activity, whether that be going to church, whatever religious organization that you may belong to, the importance of that piece of religion and spirituality is hugely important. Again, COVID, a lot of stuff became online. I know a lot of stuff is back in person, but even if you can't leave your house, you can still find things on TV, on Zoom, whatever platform they're using, and that can be really important if that spiritual connection is important for you. And then thinking about pen pals, right? Kind of old school, but when was the last time anyone wrote a letter? An actual handwritten letter, right? I started writing letters during COVID, and the reason why I started writing letters again during COVID was, as a mental health clinician in COVID, I sat at my desk every day and talked to people on the phone. I'd finish a session, I'd hang up, I'd pick up the phone, and I'd do it again. By the time I got home at night, I did not want to talk to anyone. I was talked out. I don't want to talk to anyone. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a letter. So I wrote a letter to my best friend. It took me about 2 weeks to write it. Just every day I did a little bit more, but I was like, hey, this is kind of fun. And it was actually something to look forward to in getting mail instead of bills or multiple catalogs. So think about writing a letter. It doesn't have to be anything big, but it's a way to engage. So think about those types of things. So really important to stay connected, and really important to stay connected as we age. And we'll kind of think about that as we transition into the aspect of grief. So, I really like, this is one of my favorite quotes regarding grief. So for those of us who understand, no explanation is needed. For those of us who do not, no description is possible. So I will say that most everyone knows what grief is. We all know what it's like to lose someone or something. But how do you really describe it? How do you describe the feeling? It's a hard feeling to describe because it's not just one feeling. So, the simple version is it's deep sorrow caused by a loss of someone. That's kind of like the dictionary. I would add to that, it's sorrow related to the loss of something. Pets, right? Think about it. It's not just people, it's pets. It's other things. But But according to the American Psychological Society, it's anguish experienced after a significant loss, usually the death of a person, but it causes physical distress, separation, anxiety, confusion, learning, dwelling, apprehension. It can actually cause us to self-neglect. It can create us to have thoughts of suicidal ideation, of, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go be with whoever it was, the person that you lost. Often we hear when individuals have lost someone that there's regret. I could have, I should have. There's also that sense of, poor me, I lost this person. And all of these emotions that we have when we experience grief are important, because part of being able to experience the grief is to have the emotion and feel those really icky emotions that we don't want to feel, but that's also going to help us heal. And I always say to people, your grief is always going to be with you. You don't spend 6 months grieving and then you're like, hey, I'm good. You're going to carry grief throughout your lifetime. What's going to happen is it's going to ebb and flow. You're going to grieve. You're always going to grieve the person or the thing that you have lost, but that grief is going to become less over time. It's still going to be there, but it's going to become less. And there are going to be random times where it pops up its ugly head and you're like, oh, wasn't expecting that. But each time that happens, it's not as intense for us. But grief does not go away. So one of the things that is always challenging is when I work with someone who's grieving, they're always like, everyone keeps telling me to get over it. You're never going to get over it. You're going to learn to live your life, and your grief is going to carry along and go through your life with you. So, different things that we grieve. The loss of our family, friends, our pets. Pets are a huge, huge loss. And only recently has it really gotten a lot more attention. They actually now have a program for social workers to get a master's degree in social work in veterinary studies or veterinary, I forget the exact terminology of it, because of our attachment to our pets. So that's a huge piece for individuals. We grieve the loss of our connections. We grieve the loss of our physical abilities, right? Think about when I was 20 years old, I could do a lot more than I can do now. I can still do it, it just takes me longer. And so unfortunately, as we age, we're still able to do things, we have to modify how we do things. And it's really hard. Our health decline as we age, and our health declines, or we have a serious illness that causes a life-changing event for us and we can't do things. We're going to grieve what we had. And we have to think about how can I still do and move forward in a healthy way. And then if we have a terminal illness, right, there's that sense of you're given a terminal diagnosis, we pre-grieve. We pre-grieve the loss. So if I have a terminal diagnosis, my family is likely, or my friends are going to pre-grieve my loss so that when I die, there'll still be grief, but they're pre-grieving all the way up until that actual loss. So let's talk about understanding. How do we understand grief? It's really hard because grief is subjective for every single one of us. It's personal. It's unique. No two people grieve the same way. None of us in this room are going to grieve the same way. There's normal feelings of sadness, right? Anger. There's normal feelings of, as we remember the person or thing that we lost, that the happy memories that we had with that person. So it's not just sadness and anger and depression. There's happiness too. We're not happy that we lost a person or something, but we're happy about the memories we have. And there's no timetable for grief. There's absolutely no timetable for grief. Grief, again, is going to stay with us for our lifetime. it's going to ebb and flow. It's not going to go, and as we know, the 5 stages of grief, we're not going to go through each stage and be like, okay, I went through stage 1, now I'm time to go through stage 2. They're going to come all at us all at once. We're going to be maybe accepting, but then go into denial. It's going to ebb and flow. It is not a straight line. And that's what makes it so challenging for us, because often we don't know what to expect next with grief. And as I said, it doesn't go away, right? Oftentimes, again, I hear people being like, they need to get over it. They need to get over it. It's not going to go away. It's going to stay with us. We learn to navigate it as part of our daily life. And again, as the time passes from the loss of that loved one or whatever our loss was, the grief is still going to be there. It's going to be easier for us to navigate. Over time, we know we'll survive it. We know that emotional pain will lessen, but in the moment, it does not feel that way. It does not feel like, I'm going to get through this. It's really hard to see through for people through that darkness of knowing that, yes, I will get through this, but it's so important to feel the feelings. And again, we don't like the unhappy feelings. No one likes to feel sad. No one likes to feel depressed. No one likes that, but we need to feel it as part of our healing process. So we'll talk the stages of grief. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did the 5 stages of grief, but now there's some research about 9 stages of grief, and 9 stages of grief specifically for those who are older. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages were the denial of, I can't believe this is happening, anger, like why, who are we blaming, right? Who are we pointing the finger at as to why this happened? The bargaining, right? We all bargain, like, if I do X, Y, or Z, this would be different. Depression, the sadness, it's normal, right? It's normal to feel depressed and sad. And then the acceptance. But like I say, again, this is not linear. We don't start with each stage and complete it and move to the next one. They're all over the place. Sometimes they come all at once and you just don't know how to feel. You're just like, oh my gosh, I have so many emotions and I don't know how to feel. One thing that's interesting with anger is I want you to think of anger as like an iceberg, right? So the small piece of ice you see above the water is what's manifesting as anger. But then there's that big chunk of ice you don't see that's under the water, and that's where the feelings are. That's where your shame, your sadness, your guilt, your remorse, whatever the feeling may be, that's all under there. What happens is when we're feeling all those emotions, they likely manifest as anger. So anger is actually a secondary emotion for us. And anger is healthy, provided we manage it in a healthy way. But think of it like, if you're angry, there's a lot of feelings underneath that anger, and sometimes it's trying to navigate what those feelings are. So research has actually shown us now that there's more 9 stages of grief for older adults. So still the shock, the denial, some disorganization. For many years, I worked in the emergency department up at the university campus, and unfortunately, we had a lot of older individuals coming into the emergency department that didn't survive. And it was not uncommon to see a loved one just really not, almost like they weren't there. They were almost not present and just talking about other things, or just very disorganized in their thinking. So anger, again, the guilt and bargaining, physical and emotional distress, which is different than the regular 5 stages of grief, depression, loss and loneliness, right? If you think about, let's say you've been married to your partner for 50 years, and all of a sudden, that person's died. Right? You've spent 50 years, probably more, a good portion of your life with that person, And every single day now is going to be different. That person's not there. So it's that loss, it's that loneliness. It's like, how do I think about conceptualizing my life without this person being with me? Withdrawal, right? Not wanting to go anywhere, just wanting to stay amongst yourself. Part of the reason we see withdrawal is everyone will say to me, I don't want people to tell me what I should and should not be doing. It's just easier to stay with myself, to stay by myself. Or I don't want to bring people down. So I'm just gonna not go to an event because I don't want to bring the mood of the event down. And that's hard, right? And the other reason why they'll withdraw is no one knows what to say to someone who's lost a loved one, right? And we're not going to make it better. And so oftentimes I'll tell people, just be with that person. Let them know that you know how hard this must be for them and you're sorry that they're experiencing this, but just be with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing and just sit with someone and sit in that silence and just be. And then we get to the acceptance phase at the end. So we think about shock and denial. This is usually immediately after whatever the event is. So people often feel numb. They don't have emotion. They kind of will describe it as they're going through the motions, but they're not feeling anything. They may have disbelief. They may not think this is real. You often will hear, all right, someone wake me up from this really horrible dream I'm having. So there's that disbelief it's not happening. There's a denial of the reality. And this generally is a very short period of time. Part of it is the brain's way of coping. So really, what can you do if you're supporting someone who's in this phase? You want to give someone space, right? Think about when we lose someone or something, what's the first thing everyone does? What can I do? What can I do? And everyone cooks, right? And brings food, because food is our universal language of love. Casseroles, right? Everyone gets a casserole. So you really want to offer space and let them know you're available and check in, but really not become overly intrusive. That's the time where everyone's kind of like right there, like that's when everyone comes together. And you want to validate the feeling no matter what it is. If they're angry, it's okay, let them be angry. Just validate their feelings. And this is where it's really important to sometimes just sit and be present with them, as hard as that can be. So the disorganization, that's kind of when the reality, like this is real, this is happening. It's overwhelming, right? All the stuff that has to happen after we lose someone. It's like, wow, this is happening. What am I doing? And likely, we're not sleeping well at this point. We're probably not eating well. We're probably not ensuring we've got good hydration, because so much is going on and we're feeling so many things. So we may see someone like check out, right? Just kind of like, I can't deal with this right now. I'm just gonna back away. I'm gonna check out. I'm not gonna deal with this. Some people may become overly focused on the loss. They might just become very hypervigilant about that loss. So things that you can do to help them recognize what their supports are. Is it their family? Is it their friends? Is it a church community? Is it a religious organization? Is it their community where they live that could be supportive or just check in? Again, we're going to validate the feelings. Validating their feelings is so vitally important for all of us. And allow them, if an individual wants to talk about the loss, let them talk about it in whatever way they want to talk about it. It's not right, it's not wrong. Just let them talk about it and validate how they're feeling. And then anger, right? Like, right, what's anger? It's that secondary emotion. It's feeling hopeless. It's resentment, right? How many times have we heard, how could they do this to me? Right? We know. No one's like, oh, I'm going to go out and unfortunately die, because we don't plan to do that. But it's that question of, how could this person do this? How could they leave me? You may see outbursts of emotion, right? They may seem agitated. They may be frustrated. They may be short-tempered. They may be irritable with us. It's not directed at us as the individual. It's just the emotion and how it's projecting. They may project the anger and the irritability to everyone around them, right? Think about how hard is it to be with someone who's angry, right? You've done nothing wrong. You're there to support them, and they're just angry. Again, they're not doing it purposefully to you. So again, validation, right? You're going to see validation is kind of the common theme here. Provide them space. Provide the validation. Be patient with them. Again, if you have to just sit in that silence, sit there. It's awkward. It's hard, right? No one likes to sit in silence. It's awkward silence. We want to say something. We want to fix it. We want to make it better. Our human nature is to help people and make it better. And sometimes we just have to sit in the silence, and that will help and make it better. You have to acknowledge that their feelings may not be fully rational, but that can be a natural response to our grief. That's a tricky one, right? So you have to be careful. They may not be exhibiting rational feelings, but you have to walk the line of, is it their reaction to grief, or is it truly irrational? And that's something like you shouldn't have to figure out, but just be mindful of if it does happen. So, guilt and bargaining. This is often common with the anger stage, but can also be common with the other stages. So it's the if I only had done, or if I had gotten there sooner, or if I hadn't gone away with friends, right? It's that if I hadn't done this, then the person would still be here. We as the individual are going to place blame onto ourselves. I should have, I could have prevented. I kind of call it the coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? I should have done this, I could have done this, if I would have done this. We may see people bargaining with God, right? And becoming very agitated towards their spiritual and their religious belief of why if there's this person, why if this person's supposed to be so good, why would they do this to me? So people, we bargain. And a lot of times individuals will lose their faith for a period of time. So again, what do? You validate, right? You encourage people to talk about their feelings in a way that they feel safe doing. If need be, you encourage them to seek out grief counseling. People always, I actually, as horrible as this sounds, I really enjoy doing grief counseling because you can really see the progression for someone. And I will always encourage people, I'm not going to say or do anything that's going to be like, wow, that was amazing, but it's going to give an individual, it's going to give you a safe space to just talk about how you're feeling, and no one's going to judge you, and you're just going to be able to share how you feel. We can also help people learn healthy coping skills if they get involved with or engaged with either community support groups, or individual counseling, or however it may be. Because there is, there are healthy and unhealthy ways to deal with grief. But I think validating people, again, is so vitally important that this is normal. This, right? It's not great, and I'm sorry you're dealing with it, but there's normalcy to it. So what does the physical and emotional distress look like for individuals? They may feel very hopeless and helpless. again, when we lose someone and everyone comes together initially, over time, right, that connection, that community tends to dissipate. We all go back to our normal life. And that's really when the individual needs the most support, right? It's in helping someone navigate grief, it's a marathon, right? We all come together and we're like sprinting to be supportive, but we really need those check-ins over time. Often individuals who are grieving will be like, everyone else moved on with their life, no one cares. No one understands what I'm going through. So it's really important to not only be available in the beginning, but to stay connected to the individual. So symptoms, if someone's experiencing anxiety or depression's gonna look lack of energy, poor appetite, poor sleep, emotional reaction. Anxieties, you could see shortness of breath, chest tightness, pacing, weight loss, kind of the inability to just sit still. That's kind of where the pacing, you may often see like wringing of the hands or tapping of the feet or something, like some sort of movement for anxiety. And again, validation, right? It's kind of been the ongoing theme, and really helping someone get into their healthy sleep patterns, good nutrition and hydration. And I'm not talking, when I talk about like sleep, could be I only sleep an hour or two, and maybe helping someone learn ways to sleep maybe 3 or 4 hours, right? It's not going to improve automatically. It's going to take time. But we know that if we don't have good sleep, it's harder to manage emotion for us and harder to function. And same with nutrition and hydration. You can't expect them to eat big meals. It's going to be small, more frequent meals, things that are simple for them. But just to keep up that energy is super important. So depression is normal for anyone who's experiencing grief. Depression is normal for any of us when we have events that make us sad, right? Where no one has a event that's sad and we're like, this is great, right? It's normal to feel sadness. But what we need to watch out for is that depression over time doesn't linger, it doesn't worsen. So we want to watch out for someone who's not feeling better or starting to feel despair or helpless or hopeless as that continues. It's often characterized by self-pity. And so I had a patient really kind of put it in a great way for me. She said, I had my pity party. I felt really depressed. I had my pity party and the poor me and the why me, and I kind of sat there for a while. But once I did that, I was able to move forward. So it's again, the fine line of, we're all gonna have those questions. Why me? Why did this happen? Why, we don't wish it to happen to someone else, but why did it happen to me? Then as we process those feelings, we move forward and over time slowly start to feel better. So again, validating the feeling. Validation in the way of, I know you're having a tough time, or it looks like you're having a tough time with this. No special language, no magical words. Thinking about if the person has someone they trust that they want to talk to. It could be their doctor, right? Some people have really great relationships with their primary care providers or specialists. Thinking about who that person may be that you can talk to. And then again, encouraging support, like grief support or counseling and therapy if they're open to it. Lots of different things that can help, again, trying to get them reconnected, right? Giving them their space, but helping to connect them again. So the loss and loneliness, on average, the reality of the loss sets in about 2 to 4 weeks after whatever the event was. Some people longer, some people less. It's kind of when that we come to terms with, all right, there's this new reality. I don't have to like it, but I have to accept that there's a new reality. The schedule, the routine has changed, right? The routine is maybe very different. And so we have to figure out, how do we create a new routine? How do we create structure? And so as individuals, we'll look to fill the voids, right? If we think about, you lose someone, you may have had a very specific routine. So let's say you were a caretaker for the individual, and maybe your routine was really structured, and at 9 o'clock you did this, and at 10 o'clock you did this. That's all gone. And now you have these spans of time where you're like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? So really thinking about ways to restructure and recognize that your reality is different. So at that point, we want to look at what the support networks are. Who are those individuals that we can turn to for support? Encouraging interaction, taking someone, like saying, hey, let's go here today, right? And know that you may only be there for 5 or 10 minutes because they may feel really overwhelmed, but over time that will change. And really important at this stage, kind of when that reality has set in, to be aware of the self-medicating behaviors, harmful behaviors, right? We often see in individuals, they use alcohol as a way to manage the feeling, right? Because in the moment, it feels really good, but we know that alcohol is going to create increased depression. Some people will use other medications to kind of take away that emotional pain. Some people may use self-harm. So it's really important that we are mindful of that. And we can't be angry at someone for doing it, but we have to then think about, what is our network? What are our ways to help this person? It's because it's their way of coping. It's just unhealthy coping. And then withdrawal, right? Are they detaching from activities despite the loss and a period of time for grief? Are they not wanting to engage? Oftentimes individuals may be tired of talking about it and just want to get on with their life. So again, it's a fine line. How do you support and encourage them to talk about how they're feeling, but how also do you let them move forward with life? Withdrawing, they may be totally avoiding social interaction. They may not leave their house. They may not talk to anyone, right? They just don't want to have any interaction with anyone. So again, here we're going to validate, but not force them to talk about their loss. You're not going to want to push them into social interaction, but you're going to want to kind of keep asking, right? And hopefully at some point they'll say yes. And again, helping them find someone or encouraging them to find someone that they can talk with and talk about anything, right? I don't know, they can talk about the weather if they want to that day. But they don't, and they can discuss their feelings in a way that they feel is most helpful for them. Then we get to acceptance, where we start to lose the hopelessness and we start to feel hope, right? The individual is starting to learn, like, I have a new structure, I have a new routine, I can enjoy things. It's okay that I enjoy things. It's okay that I get out and about and have fun. It's okay to have fun. They may engage in new hobbies, or they may engage in hobbies that they had a long time ago and weren't able to enjoy, and now they're back into it. So again, we want to encourage those new interests. We want to acknowledge that their past experience has changed the person going forward. Their priorities may have changed. Things that may have been important for them in the past may not hold as much importance now, and we need to be respectful of that. So our tips: resist the urge to fix. I will always say to people, I went to school and they taught me how to fix problems. And then I got out into the workforce and they said, forget all that. You're not supposed to fix the problem. So you have to resist that natural urge to fix. You want to be present with them and you want to validate, but not fix, right? You can't fix it. You can't fix someone's feeling that they're feeling. You don't have to agree with their feeling, but you have to accept that that's what they're feeling. So some common things that you can say, because that's one of the things that I hear so frequently from individuals I work with is like, ugh, this person said this to me and it was just so awkward. And they know that we're not coming at it being malicious, but some things that you can say are, I don't know what to say. I wish I had the right words to say to make this better, but I don't. Know that I'm here for you. Know that I'm thinking of you. I'm keeping you and your loved ones and others in my prayers and my thoughts. And continue connecting. I think that's the biggest piece, is continue connecting with them. Again, those first couple weeks, that first month just may be complete chaos with all the support, but think about continuing to connect with individuals after a loss. Because it's after the loss, after kind of everyone's gone back, as they say, to their normal routine, that individuals will start to feel lonely or isolated. So kind of my top 4 things, like, please don't say, is you'll be okay after a while. You know they'll be okay after a while, but in the moment, they don't know that. We don't know that. I understand how you feel, because we don't. Right? Every one of us, our experience and our feeling of grief is very different. Please don't ever tell someone they shouldn't feel a certain way. Like, please don't tell them, you shouldn't feel that way. You don't have to agree that they feel that way, and you may think, well, they shouldn't feel that way. But don't tell them that, because that's how they feel. Or telling someone they have to be strong. Like, you've got to be strong, you've got to get through this, right? Like, it's okay, they'll get through it, they're strong, but having them reminded of that can be really overwhelming for them. So a few tips, and I'm sure there's other things, if anyone's experienced loss or grief that someone has said that's on their list, but these are kind of my top 4. There's references here. If anyone is, whoever is technologically savvy, you can honestly Google grief resources in my area and you'll come up with a whole bunch of stuff. But some good resources, good ways to stay socially active too on some of these pages. So thank you, I appreciate your time, and it's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you.